Ideal, it started. Okay, perfect. There's just some words that I've got down as well to come with this introduction. So I'll run through them. So hi, my name's Adam. I also work on the Fair Work project, as you know, as I've already rambled. For those of you present in the room but not online yet, Oz is also part of the Fair Work project, who I'll be introducing in a minute. So to everyone online and in the room, welcome. When platforms fail, the cost that workers pay. That's still what it says. Fantastic. And so it's delighted to have Oz with us today to talk to this title. In the bit where it says talk about the bio of the speaker, that's what I'm going to do now. So, yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Oz. He's a friend, a comrade, and a colleague at Fair Work. And he's asked me not to share the usual biography stuff. So I'll respect that, Oz. But I would recommend that you look him up. And find out for yourself. I think his work here, but also in other contexts, shows the importance, the vibrancy, the compassion and the power of ethnographic and qualitative research methods done well. So it's been my delight to benefit by working with and learning from Oz throughout my lifespan on the project. And it's an even greater delight to then share him with you today. Yeah, so we're running this question as a slightly shorter talk than usual. Obviously, the room is such as a room can be, but we're going to try and break some of that down as much as we can and create it as a kind of open forum for question and dialogue and discussion. Oz might even be asking questions of you in the talk, I believe. So do feel free to be forthcoming with those responses. Do feel free to get involved with that. Just to add to that as well, obviously, academic spaces often create certain silences and certain invisibilities for certain people, right? And so I'm going to try my best to run this as most progressive a Q&A as possible, and that will mean deprioritizing some people and it mean reprioritizing others. So it's no offense, it's just a way to try and balance the kind of already structural imbalances that exist in a room. So yeah, just for your awareness, the event is being recorded and will be posted on our website following the event. And yeah, just to add, so yeah, obviously, be respectful of people's views in the room, be respectful of the space. And those views might differ from other people, right? But how can we present them in the most kind of kind and considerate way? But yeah, with no further ado, Oz, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks everyone for being here. This is going to be an interesting talk. Not because the opportunity came to me a bit late, but it's been a topic that I want to talk about for a while and write about eventually. My colleagues at Fair Work, some of whom are here, are going to be like, what? But really, it's been in my mind since I started looking at the data that we have collected from the UK research, and I am participating in that as an observer. I can talk more about how we do Fair Work research a bit later. But that data was telling me something that I haven't encountered when I was doing the research, the same research in Germany. The research in the UK was done mostly in 2022, which is when a lot of things were happening in the markets, especially in the platform economy. A lot of money was being taken away from the platform economy. And the research that I've done was in Germany, was a year before, in 2021, when there was a big hype about platform economy. It was seen as the future of work, was seen as the next best thing. One of the CEOs of one of the delivery companies even said, we can go to the moon. Why do we have to go to the supermarket? Crazy guy. So I was like, all right, so there are two different data sets telling me something different. And the academic bulb in me kind of like, I guess started shining. And I want to do something about it. So that's what today's talk is about. The title is When Platforms Fail, the Cost That Workers Pay. Well, the first part of the title, the platforms being digital labor platforms, they've been failing all the time. Failure for them is nothing new, and we'll get to that. They've also been failing their workers all the time. That's what we try to battle as Fair Work researchers. But the failure came with an added layer of anxiety. At least that's what the data was telling me. And I want to talk a bit about that anxiety from the workers' side and collectively think about what we can do as consumers, as academics, as individuals, to be able to basically battle that. So I'm going to start talking a bit about platforms and this entire idea of startup culture, which to me it's a bit weird. But I started learning more and more about it. I went even to some of these like interesting websites of investors and stuff, and a lot of lingo in there. I tried to make sense of what's really going on in these CEOs' heads and the management's heads. So we know that startups all aim to become the unicorn, that lovely unicorn right there. Basically $1 billion company, that's what they are. And they try to do it as soon as possible. And the way they do it is by growing bigger, faster, and earlier, because they want to get evaluated and they want to get a valuation. They want to make sure that that valuation, at least within the first 3 cycles, is over $1 billion, because then they're going to assure other investors to invest more money in them and that they can go public in the stock markets. That's the way that they attract venture capital. So how do they do it? How do they give that kind of confidence to the investors? They employ more workers, open new branches, warehouses, dark kitchens, dark stores. And just to add, I'm going to be talking specifically about the quick commerce platforms. So mostly food and grocery delivery platforms in this talk. So I'm going to put aside like ride-hailing platforms, domestic work platforms, because that's like the delivery platforms, food and grocery delivery platforms is the data that I'm looking at today. So when I was in Berlin, for example, everywhere in the city, all that I could see was signs that said, bring your friends to work with us. We're going to give you 100 euros, 150 euros, some of them. They were competing with each other. Another way to do it is to offer a wider range of products and services, not just deliver food, but maybe also deliver alcohol or start delivering diapers or et cetera, et cetera. It's up to them to figure out which market they want to delve into. Spend more money on promotions. So things like these, you probably get some of these emails. I get them all the time, even though I don't use most of these platforms, giving you money off, percentages off, etc. Spend more money on ads, advertisements, and PR. I'll get to this. One of the platforms that I looked at while I was in Germany even has their own record label. So that's one way to grow big, faster, earlier, and bigger. Of course, they have to survive competition, because in 2021, we're going to get to a graph a bit later on. You're going to see that before there was 1 or 2 platforms in this economy, and now all of a sudden in 2021, there were 15 of them, 10 of them, 15 of them, all competing in the same markets. So you have to survive competition. And one way of doing that, if you're big enough, is to acquire other competitors. You also have to survive low to negative profit margins year after year. I mentioned before that these platforms operate on failure. One of the ways, one of the things that I mean by that is their profit margins are quite low. You might ask yourself, why even do business if you're not making money? That's a good question. That's something that I keep on thinking about as well. And of course, you have to handle market volatility due to unforeseen crises and circumstances. So this can be a blessing, right? COVID-19 was a blessing for a lot of these platforms. That's why they all of a sudden just exponentially grew in 2020 and 21. Or a curse, which we currently see in 2022 onwards, the war in Ukraine, crypto crash, crypto market crash, all of which affects the platform's valuation and venture capital investments. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of the things that I mentioned. One of the platforms, Gorillas, you probably have heard about them, recently got bought over by Getir. They launched their own pedal records music label. Well, you might say they're a Berlin-based platform. In Berlin, everyone is a DJ. That makes sense. It kind of did, but for the workers, they were like, what the heck is going on? We need the money. Why are they spending all this money to a record label to create their own record label? So you can go to Spotify and they're like, artists that they collaborated with, and you can listen to their music if you're into that. And I guess you're familiar with this face here, Katy Perry, who has been featured and still is in Just Eat's commercials. Just Eat's, in case you don't know, is a food delivery platform that operates under different names or under the name of Just Eat's in several countries, including the UK. So I have mentioned there was an exponential growth in 2021. You can see I got these from Sifted. In Europe alone, back in 2015, this was in Turkey mostly. There was Getir, which still is in the market. And then to come 2020 and 21, we've seen all these new platforms come into the picture. And as you can see, this is where they, in Europe, operate. And you can see some of the colors being replicated because, as I mentioned, you have to grow bigger, faster, and as soon as possible. Then something happens in 2022, and I was doing desk research for this, and I started seeing all these varied investors, mostly writing in places like Forbes and Reuters and Financial Times. They were worried there was something happening in the market. Money was being drawn away. The empty promise of instant delivery was one of the titles. The delivery apps making gig work a digital Wild West. Actually, one of my colleagues got cited here, Alessio Bertolini. Shout out to him also from here. Ultra-fast delivery startups may have moved too fast. Like we were talking about how they have to move fast, and now they start questioning the whole business strategy. Just Eat Takeaway scales back in France as market value drops 84% in 10 months. It's a lot of money that's being lost. Venture capital's silent crash when the tech boom met reality. Deliveroo, another delivery platform that also operates in the UK, eyeing Netherlands exit as losses and challenges grow. That was August 2022. They actually exited the market in, I think, early November. Swiggy, one of the platforms in India, just to give you, like, this is a global, what I'm talking about is not just a Europe-based thing, but I'm going to be focusing mostly in Europe because that's where much of my research is based on, or has been based on so far. Swiggy's co-founder says overhiring is a mistake as he fires 380 employees. So I've started seeing more and more of these titles in some of these big newspapers. Oh, but before we get into that, just one more thing. And this is going to be a question that's going to be posed to the audience. Do any of you use any of these platforms? Do any of you ever like order food home using Deliveroo, Just Eat, or groceries? Anyone does? All right. A lot. Okay. Any of you, just tell me, like, let's say you tell me, how much was the last order that you had?
About £20 to
20 pounds. So how much of that 20 pounds do you think goes into the platform at the end after all the costs are taken away? How much does a platform make profit out of that 20?
Profit.
Wild guess is okay.
Close to £1.
£1. Okay. Why one? Less. Anyone else? Any other suggestions? More, less? Yeah.
So like in Mexico City, Uber Eats like adds something like the value. So it will take like around 30% of the restaurant's profits.
They do, that's true. We'll get to that. But how much do you think Uber Eats, let's say after a 20 or 30 pounds order, ends up pocketing after all the costs?
Like in profits or to the
Let's say
driver or-
20 or 30 pounds is the amount that you're paying with your credit card, cash.
to whom?
Is it a new market or an existing market? Because if it's a new market, they're burning money like nobody's business.
But even in existing markets, they are. So do you think it's more than one?
No.
Why are you all thinking that it's very low?
Round number bias. Oh, sorry.
Why out of 20 it's 1? And not 5 and not 10. I mean, these are big companies. They should be making a lot of profit, right? That's good. I mean, I like the pessimism. I like the way you're going because you're right about it. So here is the breakdown by McKinsey. I told you I did my desk research with I went to the dark side for a bit. It was interesting though. I learned a lot. So let's say the amount paid by the customer is around 35. Around 20 if it goes to restaurant. The driver, let's say if there's a tip, I think they're overestimating this tip, but we'll also get to that. Gets around 3.9, which leaves them at 11.1. Then comes the delivery cost, which is 5.4, minus marketing and other, leaves them with 2.9, minus the fixed costs and the infrastructure, the IT costs and other costs. What they end up getting is 1.2 out of 35. So this was kind of like something that wasn't new to the platforms. They already knew that they were profitable, but they were counting on becoming the monopoly in the markets. And then once they become the monopoly, they could then start reaping benefits. And they're also counting on a future of automation where rather than having riders do these deliveries, it's going to be robots. I think in San Francisco, they already started doing that. We had someone from US. In Texas, do they do that in Texas?
I think so. I don't really use delivery platforms too much.
I mean, that's the future that they're counting on, right?
Yeah.
So that this 1.2 could become maybe 5.2, 6.2. So we know that they're not making money. We know that there's a market crash in 2022 with the cryptocurrency market crashing and then the war happening in the Ukraine. And of course, COVID is over. All the COVID hype is over. People want to go out, eat in restaurants. They don't want to be stuck at home waiting for orders. So they still need that investment money because they're losing money. That's what they've been living on all along. And how can they then show the investors that they can at some point make a profit? What are the places where they can start tightening the belt? Well, the way they do it, and this I believe I took from one of the news pieces as well, like it's part of the desk research, to improve efficiency and reduce operational costs so that they can make the investors happy. So when they go to the investors, they can be like, okay, we see a future in you, so we're going to fund you in the next cycle, in the next funding cycle. But how do they do that? Because they're not going to make the customers pay more necessarily, because if the customers pay more, then they will stop using that, right? And there's always going to be some other competitor that's going to be giving not 40%, but 45% discount. So they're going to be moving with that. Well, surprise, surprise, workers. I mean, it is quite frustrating because the workers are already making minimum wage, some of them under minimum wage, as our Fairwork research shows. And I will get to that, to the Fairwork research and our findings in the next couple of slides, but they just go back to the workers. One way to do it, in many of the countries, they cannot justify paying them under the minimum wage. For example, if they're contracted in Germany, they have to pay them minimum wage of 10.50, 9.60, I think right now, but it's been increased to 12.50 very recently, euros. Well, then they say, let's make them work harder. Let's make sure that they just take more risks. So there's this thing maybe you've heard of key performance indicators. If you ever ordered food, groceries home, sometimes you can leave comments. Sometimes you can put a smiley face, sad face, 1 to 5 stars. Whatever. What else do they do? Probably mostly that, right?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up, thumbs down. Oh, that's part of it. They're not really that interested in that. They're more interested in things like how many orders per hour can a rider on his bike or on his car make? How much more can that person carry? So deliver more and bigger hauls. Well, as I mentioned, many of these platforms also have warehouses or dark stores, as they're known. And they have pickers there, people who, when you place an order, basically put things in a basket, put things in a little carton bag, and then give it to the rider, who puts it in his backpack and then takes it. Well, let's make them pack things quicker. And if you're not packing it quick enough, or if you're not delivering it quick enough, well, you know, we're not interested in hiring you anymore. Let's also reschedule shifts. Well, let's not forget the platform economy, the basis of platform economy, the kind of motto of platform economy is flexibility. In the interviews that we have done, workers over and over told us that they are interested in this because they just want to make some side cash on their own schedule. They also say things like, we want to experience what London is like. On a bike, it's beautiful. Weather is nice, as long as it's nice, not like this. So things like that, they also say. But let's reschedule the shifts. Let's make sure that they're shorter, more sporadic, and less flexible. And my gut feeling here, I still need to go, as I said, this is a work in progress. I still need to go back to the data and then get a deeper understanding of it. But this is done a bit intentionally because they want to get rid of a lot of the workers now. They hired so much. As I said, in Berlin, there were like flyers everywhere saying, come to us, we're going to give you hundreds, friend referral. I know of workers who have actually moved from one platform to another in bulk, and they referred each other. Great strategy. And then made money off of that. And then just pocketed that, right? That's great. They did that. And I think they should have done more of that. But now they stopped hiring more. They're trying to get rid of the workforce. And the way to do it, if you cannot simply terminate a contract, because you cannot terminate, and they did that as well, they also terminated hundreds of contracts, is to make sure that the job is not appealing to a worker anymore. Because maybe bonuses are also cut off. That's another thing. I forgot to mention it here. Delivery bonuses, for example, if you make more than 3 deliveries an hour, then you get X amount of bonus, etc. Made it harder. So that was one way of dealing with the risk and presenting to the investors in a way that the company looks profitable or look like it has a future. Another thing, and this is something that they don't like to do, but some of them had to, is to downsize and restructure. As I mentioned, delivery exited the Dutch markets earlier this year, late last year. So exit some of the markets, close down some warehouses, dark kitchens, stores, branches. I haven't had a chance to walk around London to see if there are any closed down warehouses. In Germany, in Berlin, there were a lot of them. I mean, Adam, you probably know this. I mean, I think in one of the interviews, one of the workers has mentioned that there used to be a warehouse that is no longer there anymore. And of course, if you can, fire the workers. And we're going to get to this in the next slide, but firing workers can take many different ways, not just terminating a contract, but maybe there's no contract anyways. Maybe it's an independent contractor. Maybe it's a 0-hour contract. So all of this data in Fair Work, when we talk to workers, we also talk to managements. We also collect evidence from managements. What we do is to look at 5 different principles and to see how a platform wages vis-a-vis these 5 principles. We look at payments, how much workers make, whether it's a minimum wage, whether it's a living wage, whether it's more or less. We look at conditions at work. What kind of bikes are they provided, if at all? Are they in good condition? What kind of backpacks are they provided? Are they provided winter gear, for example? And also, we also look at, like you can see, first point, second point, there are a number of different things we look at. In the second point, for example, for fair conditions, we look at whether they're provided with a safety net, sickness pay, parental leave, things like that. I mean, these are employment benefits. We all have it, as contracted workers. I mean, I say we all have it. I'm assuming most of us are on a contracted job. If not, well, that's precarity right there as well. Fair contracts. How accessible are the contracts? Are they even provided to the workers in the first place? The terms and conditions as well. Are they provided? Can the worker go back to the contract or the terms and conditions and take a look to see their rights and whether their rights are being violated or not? Fair management. Here we're looking at due process mostly. If something goes wrong at work, if a worker needs to call someone, can they reach a human representative? Do they get automated messages? Do they simply get things like, I've also seen this happen quite a lot in Berlin. When they send a text, they get a message saying, your ticket was received, thank you very much. No response. Sometimes the text is important. Sometimes the text says, I'm missing my payslip. I need to show it so that I can renew my visa. So it's not just the presence of the paperwork, but also the reason why they need that. And fair representation. If workers want to collectively have a collective mechanism to raise their voice and then go to the platform and say, look, things have to change. We can't deal with this anymore. Are there mechanisms in place? Is there union representation? Does the platform even allow that to take place? So when we break it all down, based on the data collected of platforms continuing to fail, but also failing at new or exacerbate ways of their workers, what we see is, in terms of fair pay, there are delayed payments, missing payments, and wage and tip theft, which is very hard to prove, but a lot of workers that we interview do actually mention that they never get their tips because a lot of the tips are given to workers through the use of the app. And they don't know how much they're going to get, but the customer says, I tipped you, don't worry. And a lot of it in the platform lingo, when the management responds to some of these tickets, some of these queries by the workers, they say, sorry, there was a technical glitch. Don't forget, a lot of these platforms consider themselves tech platforms, and they're quite notorious for having technical glitches. So their infrastructure, if that is the case, is failing. In terms of conditions, the gear that's provided to workers is often in quite bad condition. And this is not something new, but if platforms are failing, if they are trying to cut down costs, this becomes one of the means to do that. Lack of monitoring of warehouse conditions, the dark stores, etc., or subcontractors. A lot of these platforms have also been started seeing a lot more using subcontractors, basically third-party labor providers, logistical providers, to bring in more workers. But who is monitoring them? What if something goes wrong? Who is accountable? Does the platform take responsibility for that? And there is increased lone working risks. I've already mentioned these KPIs, the key performance indicators, pushing workers to do more in less time. So they're asking their workers to be faster, engage in more riskier work, take heavier loads. With regards to contracts, we see an increased use of zero-hour contracts, independent contractors, subcontractors, and third-party contractors. And oftentimes, especially with the case of independent contractors, what happens is you don't get any social security benefits. If something happens at work, and you can't work, well, that's it. I mean, your income is, you're not going to be able to make income, and you're not going to be able to get any sick pay. With regards to management, we see more and more a lack of response by the management. And this, once again, I have dived deeper into the data, I think has to do more and more with platforms offshoring a lot of their help centers, hotlines, call centers, etc., to other countries. So a worker might be sending a text or calling, and there might be a human representative if they're not getting an automated response. But that human representative may be in a completely different city, may not even know the topography of that city. So the worker might be like, I'm lost, I need an address. And they might be looking at the same Google map as the worker is also looking. Finally, fair representation. There are, and this has been an ongoing thing, platforms don't want their workers to unionize. They sometimes say that we're okay with them unionizing, but then you see a lot of union busting activities in the background taking place. And you also see repercussions for worker organizing. Yes, please.
What does a union mean in the context of a platform? Normally you're unionizing like against an employer. And here you have many different employers, and you often don't serve the same employer more than one. And the employer is a drunk person calling you for pizza. Like,
but that's not your employer, right? Your employer is the person, is the platform that is employing you to deliver that pizza.
okay, so it's saying the platform is
Not
like
the customer. Yeah, I mean, there are also horrendous stories that workers tell us about their interaction with the customers. Sexual harassment, racism, xenophobia, like we encounter these stories, and we expect the platform to step in on behalf of the worker. If there's an issue that the worker faces, and this happens more and more in domestic work platforms, because there are a lot more risks, lone working risks associated with domestic work platforms where you have to be in someone's house alone. If something goes wrong, platforms usually say, get a lawyer. Oh, that we don't like. So let me give you some of the, yes,
Can I
please.
just, on that last point, because I was in Berlin also before this,
Mhm.
and I know one thing that is very popular in Berlin is legal insurance. Has this seen an uptake amongst like those who are working for platforms? I mean, is there special, isn't something you have looked at? I just
In
noticed
the UK, you mean? Or,
In
do the
Germany,
platforms provide that legal insurance? No, I've never come across
But
it.
have you seen like, interest from on that behalf of like employees who are investigating it? Because this is just what I know that that basically everybody has to have legal insurance because.
Yeah,
if you
that's
don't,
also a peculiarity of Germany, right? It's like, one of the first thing that I was taught is like, get that legal insurance. What if you hit someone's car and then you're gonna have to pay?
Well, it's not just legal insurance, it's also like liability insurance and
Liability
everything
insurance,
else.
yeah.
But I mean, I would assume that there would be some. Platforms are basically telling people, get a lawyer. I would assume that there would be policies directed towards these people. I was just wondering if that had come up at all.
Or have you ever come across policies from platforms that provide that kind of
Not from the
legal counsel?
platforms, but like from lawyers, like.
Oh, there are like, I mean, in Berlin, for example, I also was actively attending court cases with the workers, and there were, of course, lawyers representing them, oftentimes pro bono.
Mm.
So there are lawyers, there are community activists. And we're talking about Berlin, there's always going to be that community support in there. But, yeah, that's great. And that's the reason why there was a lot of worker activism, which I'm not talking about right now. But in Berlin, while I was doing the research, a lot of the workers have actually founded works councils, platform workers, I'm talking specifically, in an economy where none of these workers have any union representing them. There's a union that represents service workers, as you know, Verdi, for example, but they're not necessarily, there's not a single union there was not. In the UK, you tell me, I mean, you guys are doing the bulk of the UK research. Is there a single union? There are independent unions like IWGB, of course, but is there a single union that actually represents in bulk platform workers?
Yeah, no, there's ones that are community based. I think also on the legal thing, there's it comes under insurance a lot of the time in the UK context. So you'll have pay-as-you-go insurance that covers you on a job, and within that will be legal liability. So if you're interested, companies like Zego, for example, use pay-as-you-go insurance, but they often pay a massive premium. It's like 80p an hour, things like that. But it will cover also rider liability as well. But like legal liability becomes part of what's bound up in there.
So I will have to move a bit faster. We have a lot of examples. I don't think I'm going to have the time to go that deep into them, but these are basically raw data from the worker interviews from 2022 UK research that tells you how workers perceive these risks. So a Gorilla's warehouse supervisor that we interviewed says that I'm pretty sure they have expanded too quickly. Basically what I was talking in the earlier slides is what this worker is saying. And he says that one of the fundamentals of how to run a business is to look after the people that are doing the job for you, the workers. That's how I see it. They're slipping big time with that. Over the last 6 months or so, we've been continuously, and by we, it's Gorillas, continuously opening new stores, reducing staff. It's been quite a hard few months, not gonna lie. The same person mentions that there was deactivation cases, and we did ask prompt what's causing these deactivations, basically redundancies at job. It could be for bad performance and attitudes. They open new disciplinary procedures every week, and I think the following week they will go through a termination. So it happens weekly or every fortnight. I think they've expanded once again so much. They've hired so many people, realize that it's not actually that busy right now, and they're losing a lot of money. So they're trying to reduce, basically get rid of. Basically, I don't know, but this is how I see it's going. That's how like some of the things that I've tried to bring to your attention in the earlier slides are basically data that also are outcomes that our interview data also reflects. A Gorilla's rider, basically on his bike, says, I don't care about the 10-minute delivery. Gorillas and a lot of these quick commerce delivery platforms have this motto that they're going to deliver in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, etc. And as I mentioned, the KPIs, the key performance indicators, are now being stricter, implemented in a more stricter fashion. So that the 10-minute delivery has become a thing, has always been a thing, but has actually become a thing that is enforced to the workers. I don't care about the 10-minute delivery time sometimes because I know this is Gorilla's advertisements that they do the 10 minutes delivery. But amongst riders, what I saw is that they did tend to jump the red lights, to cross the pedestrian lights, and tend to ride faster than normal riders. I feel like this is more prone to accidents because of time pressure and because of the call. If you're already late, asking what happened, basically they get a call like, where are you? It's been past 10 minutes, get back to the warehouse. Because of that pressure, we tend to go faster, which means more chance of accidents. Another rider, I've had bad experience and good experience. So the good one is just like it's flexible, and I like working outside and going to different locations around the city. The staff are friendly and we meet different people. But the bad side of it, the payments, sometimes you'll go like 2 months before you get paid. As I mentioned, there are technical glitches. Yeah, and secondly, I did have an accident. If you have an accident, you don't have any protection. This probably came from an independent contractor who didn't get wasn't provided the accident insurance and all the protections that contracted laborers at Gorillas would get. A Stewart writer, Stewart is another platform, delivery platform. There have been people that have had accidents, car accidents. There was a guy who was sacked by Stewart's because he was a bit slow and lazy. But we had a couple of accidents, possibly seen as a bit of liability as well, because he had 2 accidents. In my mind, he wasn't really as focused as he should have been riding a bike on the road, but he got hit by a car once. Then he fell off and bruised his knee, bruised his leg, and didn't want to move because it hurt. And he was very disturbed. I went and saw him at the time and waited for an ambulance to come. But I don't think it was anything serious. But anyway, so I mean, there's that kind of major and minor injury risk, but there's also a threat of other people, having to interact with your customers or other cars being out on the streets. A Gorillas writer, so as I mentioned, these risks that companies are dealing with is being kind of put onto workers in terms of pushing them into taking more risks to make the deliveries. And he says, I take risks because of the time promise, and that will be reflected in my weekly performance. And this weekly performance will judge who will stay in this job or not, because so many workers got terminated because of no performance. So we're afraid of that. Another writer, sometimes you have to ride much faster than you want to meet the 10-minute delivery target time. They measure your delivery time. It can be hard sometimes to meet the 10-minute targets. Sometimes there can be a lot of pressure. Once again, on the issue of risks, a Stewart writer says, I would take less risks at work if I was paid more. Let's say I work for about half an hour and there's no job coming. So there's a certain area which is like a bit unsafe. So if I was waiting for half an hour and there's no job coming and there came an order from that area, that unsafe area, I could not afford to wait another half an hour. So I just have to take it. So they have to take the unnecessary risk, lone working risk, and putting their lives in jeopardy to make money. Like that's what how I'm reading the data, and I'm looking forward to hearing your reflections on that. So terminations, as I said, is a big deal, and I've seen a lot more interviewees discussing terminations in the interview data, in the UK data, than I've seen in Germany. Probably because, as I mentioned, in Germany, they were interested in hiring more and more. Now they're interested in sacking more and more, firing more and more. I didn't get any warning before my termination. I just got the email. I finished my shift, and then the next day I got an email saying I was being terminated. The email said that my average completion time is higher, so we're sending you a termination letter. Please sign it and send it back. I just had to return my uniform to the warehouse, and that was it. I think it was unfair because it was not my fault that the customer is giving the wrong address. There was no way to appeal to their decision, and my termination was immediate. I had no disciplinary problems prior to my termination. Like, this worker does not know why he got terminated. He could not even reach the platform to get an answer. He tried, he did not. Stewart writer says, Stewart systematically sent out warning messages like, I had 2 major spillages in the bag, so the customer rejected the order, so I had to contact them about that. They said, dispose of the food, the customer got a refund. The next day I got a message saying, be aware that not delivering the packages carefully is contravening the terms and conditions or whatever. So it's your responsibility to take more care. I get the impression they have a flag system, and if you raise too many flags in the system, then it'll be manually looked at and investigated, and you might be terminated. That has happened. I'm aware. People have come to me too in the last month or two saying that they've been terminated and asking them to please get them back on the job. Finally, yet another Stewart writer who didn't provide us his age in the interview says, I had automated messages regarding undelivered food, even though it was delivered. The issue was not resolved, but it left me very worried about my future prospects, about the future prospects of this job to be lost this simply. And then the worker messaged Stewart about the issue with delivery. And the answer he got was, they said they can't disclose which order it is. And you just think, well, that's ridiculous. And that made me feel really nervous. You just think, I can't afford to lose my account, and I don't want to lose it either. So there's that fear of losing the job. That's like, the interview data is telling me quite clearly. And that's something that I haven't necessarily seen when I was in the research in Germany. So let's get to the fair work part, and I'm gonna wrap this up really fast because I want to leave some time for question and answer as well. So, as I mentioned, this is what we look at, the platform economy from the workers' perspective. And we do the research in 38 countries right now. UK is one of them, Germany is one of them, as you can see on the map, a number of countries in there. And the way we do the research is basically that we start with the desk research, figuring out which platforms we're going to evaluate, gather some data on them. Then we move on to worker interviews, do 6 to 10 interviews per platform. And we also try to reach out to management. Sometimes they talk to us, sometimes they don't. Oftentimes in the second year of research, they're more willing to talk because maybe they got a bad score in the first year. And then we put it all together, publish reports, and engage in a number of other activities. We create country league tables like this. This was from Germany when I was doing the research. This is from South Africa. And this is from Ecuador. This you can find in the reports that we publish. And so far, in the last year, in our efforts to keep platforms they count through this research, we have seen 8 platforms changing terms or increasing their payments to their workers. So 8 changes on fair pay, 26 changes on fair conditions, like implementing GDPR, compliant data management policy, introducing sickness insurance, etc. 37 changes on fair contracts, translating the contracts in languages that workers that who do not speak the language of the country, so that they can understand. 48 changes on management, improving appeals processes, implementing anti-discrimination policies, and 15 changes in fair representation, agreeing to an election of workers representative, opening up of works councils, etc. We try to influence the consumers by publishing these scores and engaging in things like podcasts. Engage with institutions as well. We have the Fair Work Observatory, where if institutions or companies are interested in us providing them an evaluation or providing them a review, then in some cases we have a global campaign right now that we're engaging with, that's been going on for the last year and a half. And we have the Fair Work Pledge. We collaborate with workers through different means. As you have seen, there are a number of stickers right here. As you can see, I'm wearing a Fair Work t-shirt. We try to produce things out of this research in conversation with the workers. It's not like we think that workers' rights should be like this, but we talk to the workers. We ask them to design us concepts or come up with ways to improve our research. And we try to intervene in policy discussions by publishing op-eds and blog entries, etc. Some of the impacts that we had last year through this research, you can see up on the screen. We rated 208 platforms altogether, in all 40 countries, 283 ratings. 102 changes were made by the platforms, by 33 specific platforms. Quite a good media coverage, I would say. Academic publications, hopefully this presentation one day is going to become one, and pledge signees. Here is a picture from a street art campaign that we did, thanks to Namneet and Pablo for this, in Colombia, working with a local artist in Colombia. Billboard campaign in Brazil, where we had billboards on vans traveling around the city, trying to influence the consumers to raise awareness to workers' rights issues. There is a solidarity merch, as I mentioned. Some of the stickers are still here. Please feel free to take some on your way out. Recently, we tried to intervene in negotiations or talks that were taking place in the International Labour Organization by coming up with a manifesto. Well, the link is quite a bit long, but if you search for Fair Work ILO manifesto, it's there. If you're interested in signing it, we'd be very happy. And now this manifesto is being translated into different languages where we do our research. As I mentioned, there's the pledge campaign, where we call institutions, universities, charities, companies to sign the pledge to make sure that they take a look at our scores before making decisions with regards to whether to use a certain platform or not. And for more, you can always take a look at our annual report, which is on the website. Once again, quite a long URL, but if you search for Fair Work Annual Report 2020, you can find it online. We're a big team, and I want to thank everyone. Obviously, I'm not going to read the list, but we are a big team, and I'm very happy to be among colleagues that are very supportive and that are very pro-worker in this research. So thank you.
Ideal. Thanks very much, Joseph. If we swap places, I can see the Q&A. That's all right as well. Yeah, if anyone online, please feel free to drop questions into the Q&A. I think just in the interest of time, we'll try and group questions maybe, and then reflect on them kind of 3 at a time, if that makes sense. I don't know if anyone's got any. I'm just slowly bringing Q&A up. But yeah, just offer some reflection. And obviously, we kind of look at how different risks start to augment, right, in different contexts, how different risks augment with other types of risks. So what happens when you're a migrant under hostile environment, right? How does that change your relationship to capital? And I think what's obvious from what Oz has been saying is that it's the same old story. It's kind of emperor's new clothes in a way, that, you know, the profits under capital are kind of raged over the battlefield of the worker's body, right? And it's the transference of risk in many different ways. If people have any questions, please do feel free to throw up a hand. I'll read one out that's just on the Q&A for now. What do workers prefer? This is a very practical question. Tips in hand or through the app?
In hand,
In hand,
of
indeed.
course,
Difficult.
because they cannot see if they're being tipped or not on the app. They just get, like, at the end of oftentimes most of these platforms, they get a summary at the end of the month or every 2 weeks, depending on the payment structure, saying that this is how much tips you earned this in this cycle. And they cannot really judge if that is true or not. A lot of workers also try to keep track of how much they're working, and they keep track of how much money they should be making. That's why they sometimes go back to platforms and say, hey, my wages are missing. What's happening? If they don't do that, no one's going to know. Like, these are worker strategies that workers just, you know, by talking with each other come up with. Platform does not provide any opportunity for these kinds of talks or awareness.
Any questions from the room? Yeah, we'll take you, then you, if that's all right, and answer together, if that's okay.
Have you find as part of your research, like, any differences among, like, women and men, depending on the roles that they are performing? Especially because I've seen that in Latin America, this has been an issue with regards, like, to female, like delivering food, especially like at nights. That sometimes they have been victims of harassment, and they have come, like, with different tactics in order, like, to
Definitely, and a lot of the workforces in the delivery sector is quite male oriented. Like, the female workers tend to be more in the warehouse doing the picking, pickers, and the male workers are more out on the streets. Obviously, this is not, you know, this is a generalization. There are women riders as well, but we push platforms in 2 ways. One, through not discriminating against, let's say, women who might want to work, or being more open to employing them also in these jobs. So, for example, Uber drivers. When was the last time that you've taken, or Free Now, or, you know, any of the ride hailing, taken one of these cars, and then there was a woman driver in the seat? I had a couple of those, and I was like, oh my God, can I please talk to you? You're the first woman driver that I've come across. I need to talk to you about this research. That didn't happen, but I was really excited. I'm like, oh my God, this is happening. And the second thing is, we really try to push platforms to be aware of issues that may be more specific to you know, a worker's needs, you know, whatever gender they identify themselves with. So if you know, let's say in the case of a woman, if she says, I don't want to do deliveries after nights, I don't feel secure, then the platform should give that person that flexibility to be able to schedule. And I don't know if this is, like, I don't know if there's still capacity for platforms to provide that kind of flexibility. In the case of some of the, for example, Muslim riders on their bikes, they don't want to do alcohol delivery, especially during the month of Ramadan. They don't want to do that at all. Some platforms will actually provide that kind of, like, either in conversation with us or already in policies in place. Some platforms don't. If they do, we usually highlight them in our report, saying that this is a good practice, this is a best practice. So this should be implemented more and more in other sectors.
Just to add very briefly on that as well, that ripples out through the various diasporas that work in many of these kind of jobs. So I used to be a food delivery rider, but on a push bike, right, in London. And what we see, for example, we have a broad contingent of Brazilian women that will do that work on motorbikes, but that isn't the same for necessarily the Chilean or the Ecuadorian diaspora in London, who, you know, we were, insofar as working for a union at the time, we would see much more commonly when we were trying to organise cleaners, for example, in university buildings. So different, like those kind of lines do still travel through the diaspora as well, which I think is important to add. And just to add as well, that there's a temporal dimension to this on risk and flexibility, is that whilst the platforms tell you, you have all the flexibility in the world to work whenever you like, who the hell is ordering lunch at 4 o'clock? Yeah. Nobody, right? So you have to work at specific times. Because what you're looking at really is peak order volume, and that's what means that you might access work as a worker. So, you know, working at night, for example, often there is no choice, even though the platform says, well, fine, work at 10 o'clock in the morning if you want. Nobody's ordering food, so you have the freedom to log on. You have the freedom to work is a very different question. Where you onboard risk in relation to that is key. I'm just aware there was the other question there as well.
I was actually going to ask exactly the same.
Okay,
so thank you.
Amazing, kismet, that's perfect. Yeah.
Well, maybe moving from the empirical part to, since you have the, anyways, if you're thinking about doing this in an academic paper, from like a sociological or theoretical perspective, what are some of the things that you're engaging with when you're doing this sort of work? I just hear the word, you know, for example, we're talking about risk, and so my mind is going to like Ulrich Beck and saying risk society.
Yeah, risk
like
society.
That.
Well,
or have you thought about
honestly, there are moments where I'm just sick of theory, because theory does not tell me anything about the realities on the streets, on the ground. But I don't want to like, dismiss your question. I fully agree. There are also times where I'm like, academic paper, who's going to read that? Who's going to care about workers' rights if I write an academic paper? That's the reason why I try to, in my presentation, show you very fast, but show you these different ways through which we try to engage with the larger audience. That's not just academics. But what are the theories that we use when we're like we're thinking about like theories on collective representation? We're thinking about theories on risk, but not necessarily Ulrich Beck. I don't think they ever used Beck.
Yeah, I think there's also like that position of being in kind of a critical project, right? Obviously, a lot of us are going to be critical scholars in here. Hopefully, all of us are going to be critical scholars in here. And I feel like the tech industry is sometimes not very critical of itself, right? Where it has this kind of faux criticality. And it's the reification of risk. Oh yeah, the reification of failure even. It's, oh, we'll fail upwards. You can only learn by losing. But that pangs to me of lean-in feminism, right? It's who can afford to take those failures? Who can afford to onboard them? And it's that kind of, the kind of subjectivities and intersectionalities that play out through that are really important. Yeah, in terms of risk, I'll have to think about theorists. I mean, there's lots of thinking around like the transferal of different types of risk, for example. So what is felt as precarity becomes financial risk, or what is felt as risk under hostile environment gets translated into how you might take other risks.
There was also, just to add, like a lot of the early emphasis on digitalization of economy was through geographers that were interested in the spatialization of this internet geographies, right? And what's happening, how is our understanding of the urban landscape changing, how are platforms changing the urban landscape by their physical or digital presence, etc. But lately I am like, what's really occupying my head, and we have recently done a podcast through OII with Nayana and Josh on this, is I'm interested in the idea of power and narrative. And this like goes back to my anthropological training. I'm an anthropologist by training, and I'm interested in whose behalf am I speaking? What kind of, what are my eyes seeing? How can I make my narrative and my academic, if you want to put it, output more collaborative? So I'm not writing on behalf of a specific community, in this case workers, but I'm writing it with them. So what I try to do in the last couple of pieces that I've published is to bring in workers and to give them the credits, because who am I? Like, I just go and observe. I go to a courtroom, I attend the workers collective discussion. I sit there, listen, try to do some things to make things a bit better, try to push the management, but I'm not there to write on behalf of them. I'm there to write with them. And that's what I'm trying more and more. And that's, I think, what Fair Work does better than a lot of other academic projects, because we try to, when we come up with a concept, we always make sure that that concept has roots on the ground. So as I mentioned, like these stickers, for example, just to give you one example, have all been designed not by Navneet over there, who is our comms lead, but in conversation, Navneet in conversation with people on the ground, who the local designers who talk to other workers, who ask them about their needs, what kind of message should be on that sticker, what kind of message should be on a flyer. Like that's something that I'm thinking more and more lately.
I'm just going to be cheeky. I'm aware there's a couple of questions to burgle a couple of minutes. Is that all right to do one final round of questions? So there's one here which links to that from online. So let's ask all the questions first and then just reply at the end. So thanks very much for the presentation. Is risk the word that workers use to describe the working conditions? They're referring to it in terms of security or insecurity or in other ways. And then also, I think we'll take these two if that's all right, because I saw those two hands were up. And then
Yeah, I was just going to ask, kind of where the biggest powerful changes, like clearly you publish these reports and they've had quite a big impact, they've had changes. And I assume the management of these companies are not amazed, but as in like they know what they're doing. So is the biggest kind of power coming through consumers changing behavior or like legislative changes? Who's putting pressure on the companies?
yeah, nice one.
And then maybe unpopular statement, but I in general believe in the usefulness of market-based solutions, but it sounds like these are all going to fail if you have venture capital. So like, that just bails you out. So then you treat workers horribly, they have no other choice. And then, so they just, get a new influx of capital. So like, is that the problem?
Well, that is,
We have one last one. And we'll bunch all the answers together.
sorry.
Also something
It's
cheeky.
more about the methodology that you used to create the rating. I think that's really interesting. But it seemed to me it's quite binary. So either we get the point or not. But I assume that there's so much nuances how you measure certain things. So I'm just wondering how you make this kind of binary decision and then add up the points.
Yeah, it's a 1 or 0, you're right. But
Yeah.
that also becomes a strength of like that also it becomes a tool for us to push platforms, because if you're gonna provide more so that you can get the point. Like that's our like in management meetings, that's the way that I guess we as academics, as scholars can show some teeth and say, hey, look, do more. You're close to getting this point, do more. And if you do more, that's going to make the workers' lives better. And then that's going to also grant you the point. And because platforms, if they get a higher point, they actually celebrate that. And 10 out of 10 is just the minimum standards of fairness, right? It doesn't mean that they're doing a fantastic job, but still they celebrate that. Your question was about, just very quickly.
Is venture capital.
Venture capital.
a problem?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. Because at the end of the
And
day,
we do it,
at the end of the day, they're
anything.
gambling. They're gambling, and they're not just gambling money, but also with people's lives.
Can I add some context as well instead? Basically, I'm cynical, but the way I see it is labor platforms are broadly financial products for super elite, super wealthy people to play around with, right? Or for investment funds, institutional investors. What we see post-crash, very, very low interest rates, right? And so your money has to get more aggressive to start working. Previously, money makes money was true. Suddenly, 2008 happened. Shit, that's not true anymore. I'm rich, but I can't get any richer. It's a huge moment of crisis. And so what happens is that we see VC firms really kind of looking at how to portfolio high risk and low risk companies together, right? And they're taking on enormous amounts of risk here. And so in that kind of market, what we see is if a portfolio lasts 10 years in a fund and it's made up of 10 platforms, what we'll see is that 2 are definite losers. They expect them to go bankrupt. That's sunk cost. 6 will break even and 2 will make returns on aggregate big enough to outplay the markets over that same period of time, right? Over 10 years. So those 2 platforms have to, in order to be able to attract investment, provide the option for monopoly big enough to pay for 8 failures within the portfolio, right? And so what that creates is a really, really kind of volatile and toxic environment where platforms are working under, but that's passed down essentially to workers. It trickles down onto workers. It's where trickle down is true. When it comes to economics, trickle down is just a trick. But when it comes to risk, I think there is a direct transfer of risk here in terms of finance. And what we see as they move towards IPO broadly, or a liquidity event, or kind of closure or M&A, is that the formula gets tinkered with. And often, like we saw in that chart that Oz brought in, worker cost is one of the highest after restaurant, for example, or the other part of the market is one of the highest outgoings. And so that's where you have to squeeze. But really, are the platforms interested in ever becoming profitable, or is it the dumping of shares onto other people that are sucker enough to buy them? I think that's a really interesting question moving forwards. And I think it's when we look at the kind of graphs that we see of platforms that have IPO, they're grim. They are not nice because their balance sheets are dreadful. Uber lost $5.3 billion in a single quarter, not even a year, a quarter. These businesses are set for failure. But they're interesting kind of financial decisions to play. And of course, if you're an angel investor, your interest isn't in the success of the companies, you're in the value of the shares 10 years post your investment, 8 years post your investment. And what we see is that is correlated to a decline in working conditions. If that makes sense, it's a kind of way to respond to that.
I
But
didn't
yeah,
have
sorry.
time to bring in some numbers, but Adam, if there are any venture capitalists that are watching
Yeah.
us, hire this guy. He knows a lot of this shit. Wow. With regards to risk, is that what workers use? So what I guess that's actually a very good question that I need to think about, because one of our questions in the interview is what kind of risks do you take? So maybe our question is guiding a bit. Now I'm thinking about that. So thanks a lot for that. I don't have an answer because workers did respond. I think that came from the audience, high audience that came through our audience, but then workers do respond that they do take risks. They do take risks because they have to speed up, etc. But we also bring risk as a concept to this game. So that's something that we will have to think about as we think about reformulating interviews. There was one more question, I believe, that I'm missing.
Yeah, it was my question. It was what's the biggest kind of change? Power.
Oh. Well, we want to see more, like that's why we have the ILO manifesto. There's an EU directive for platform work that's taking place. We had a blog entry about it, and we want to continue on intervening in the conversation. So policymakers, because if policymakers say Uber workers, Uber drivers have worker status, well, that's going to change the whole landscape, because once you get the worker status, then you're going to have to provide a lot of benefits to that. Customers, sure, but at the end of the day, I can tell you that this platform is crap, but you might be getting a 50-pound off and you might still say, hey, I'm going to take that. So we leave that to the customer's conscious, but all that we can do is to provide the information and put it out there publicly so that they can make a conscientious decision about it. Platforms, if they are willing to change, we are here to help them with that change. And some of them are, as you've seen in the metrics, that there are platforms that have gone through a number of changes, and some of them are not. And those who are willing to change are the ones who end up getting better scores than others, of course.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Sorry for overrunning. I thought the conversation was well worth it. That's like overrun. But yeah, thanks, Mark, also for having us and entertaining us in the space, and for everyone for so generously lending not only your ears but also the insights that you had to share with it. So thank you for that. And have a lovely evening. I think I will knock around a bit as well. I think we'll keep talking.
And there's some stickers here if anyone wants. There's more in our office.
So
Stuff
stop
I
sharing now.